suffer a cyber attack that created fuel shortages and price spikes that lasted for weeks. As member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, we are taking a close look at these incidents to gather lessons learned and determine whether federal laws or regulations should be revised to enhance grid security and resilience. We're also gathering the perspectives of the electric industry and state partners to learn how we can harden our grid, improve situational awareness, and enhance grid security, and support the response efforts. With that, I'd like to welcome our witnesses and thank them for appearing before us today. I look forward to learning more about the substation attack that occurred here in Moore County so I can share the lessons learned with electric utilities and state officials in my home state of South Carolina and others across the country with my colleagues back in Washington. So I'd now like to recognize your congressman from North Carolina, Richard Hudson, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a day we've been looking forward to for a long time. I want to thank all the folks in the audience who are here today. I want to thank my colleagues for making this trip to my home here in the beautiful Sand Hills. I want to thank Chairman Jeff Duncan for your leadership. I want to thank our witnesses for making time to be here today. We really look forward to your testimony. And I think the testimony we're going to hear today is really going to set the table for a national discussion on grid vulnerability. And I'm proud that this discussion begins in my home here today with my friends and neighbors here, part of this. We just this morning toured the site of one of the substations that was attacked, and I wanted my colleagues to see the sophistication of that attack and understanding the larger implications that plays into the vulnerabilities of our total grid. And I think we can learn from what happened here, what could happen somewhere else if a more sophisticated, or excuse me, a larger scale attack of this sophistication ever were to happen. There's a number of VIPs in the audience, and I'm gonna get in trouble if I start naming some of them, but I have to single out our Sheriff, Ronnie Fields, for your incredible leadership, and particularly the way you've stepped up, and you and your deputies working with local law enforcement throughout this. Thank you, sir, for the incredible job you do every single day.
Is your mic on?
Is my mic on? Oh, wow.
I thought I was speaking loud.
Let there be light. That's a little too loud. I'm not going to start over, but thank you, Sheriff. Also, Senator Tom McGinnis, thank you for your leadership on the state level in the state Senate. I see Neil Jackson, our representative, and Ben Moss. They've been working legislation, really important legislation. In fact, I think the governor today is signing legislation that y'all worked on to increase penalties for attacks like this. I think that's really important. I'm going to get in trouble, but I know the chairman of our county commissioner, Nick Pacerno, is here, and a number of our commissioners. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for being here today. We've got our Mayor John Strickland of Pinehurst. Thank you for being here, sir. I see a number of members of the village council. Mayor Bob Farrell from Aberdeen, I understand, is here. Taylor Clement is here representing the city of Southern Pines. Thank you. Mike Harden, our district attorney. We went to separate high schools together. We've known each other a long time. Thank you for your leadership. I could go on and on. There's so many dignitaries and people here who have shown great leadership throughout this. Thank you for being here with us today. Again, as I said early this morning, we toured the substation that was one of the sites of one of the attacks on December 3rd, leaving my home and 45,000 of my neighbors without power for, in some cases, almost a week. In the aftermath of this attack, our hospital was impacted, threatening medical treatment. Schools were shut down. Businesses were affected. Stoplights went dark. Gas stations were closed. Cell signal was impacted. Water couldn't be heated. Our region suffered millions of dollars in damage, and right before Christmas holiday. It really made the hundreds of pounds of deer meat that I lost in my freezer seem pretty insignificant. But we felt that. An attack like this could have devastated our community, and we didn't go without our struggles. But overall, I am so proud of the resilient response of the people of Moore County in the days and weeks that followed these attacks. The people here truly showed the best of Moore County, the best of North Carolina, and the best of our nation. Community groups stepped in and ensured our vulnerable neighbors weren't left without access to critical care and resources. Within hours, churches like First Baptist Church of Aberdeen and First Baptist Church of Pinehurst and the Yates Thagard Baptist Church offered shower, laundry, and meal services. Harris Teeter offered free ice for folks for medicine and food. Staff and volunteers of the Boys and Girls Club of the Sand Hills partnered with our food bank to prepare 800 care packages. Our fire and rescue, police department, and library opened up their doors for folks to access the internet and to charge their phones and devices. All throughout, I'm grateful for the tireless and heroic efforts of the workers of Duke Energy and local providers, including Randolph Electric Membership Corp., Lee Electrical Construction, and Pike Electric, who worked tirelessly in the cold, 24/7, in the dark, under tremendous stress to get these substations back online. Thank you for your incredible commitment to our community. It's inspiring to see how everyone came together in our time of need, and I want to reiterate my many thanks to all those who assisted during this time. Again, I want to recognize our Sheriff, Ronnie Fields, for his incredible response and his leadership working with local law enforcement, and for continuing to follow up on tips and leads to determine who's responsible for December's attack. I share the community's frustration that we still haven't found those responsible. But in Washington, I've worked with the Select Committee on Intelligence to coordinate classified briefings from the FBI on their assessed threat, not only in this case, but the overall threat to our grid. I'll continue to push the FBI to make these attacks a priority and to make sure that the appropriate information sharing occurs and the cooperation with our local law enforcement so that those responsible can be held accountable. Since the attack occurred, I've been in listening mode. I've heard from constituents, from our grid operators, from community developers and business owners who have concerns about our grid security and resilience, all against the backdrop of historic high energy costs. I share your concerns. That's why, as I promised in the days following the attack, I brought Washington to Moore County. I want to show my colleagues who are here today not just the numbers and facts, but the people personally affected and to hear their experiences. Everyone needs to know the full impact of this kind of an attack, the urgent need to address vulnerabilities that this exposes in our grid. There are 45,000 stories of why Moore County and our nation need greater grid resilience. Now we have the opportunity to hear from experts in the industry and those who call North Carolina home on the current state of our grid security and how we move forward from these attacks. My colleagues and I welcome these testimonies to help us do our jobs effectively. And I can guarantee you, when we head back to Washington to work, our critical energy transmission infrastructure and what vulnerabilities exist will be at the forefront of our conversations. So I thank my colleagues for being here today. I thank our witnesses again for making the time. We look forward to the discussion that's going to follow. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman, for his statement. And that concludes members' opening statements. The chair would like to remind members that pursuant to the committee rules, all members' opening statements will be part of the record. I want to echo my colleague and thank Duke Energy and really all the utilities that are involved in how to do these things. But this was a Duke Energy site, and we thank them for their work with us. I also want to thank Sheriff Fields and the information you provided, and my longtime friend, Senator Tom McGinnis. And I'll applaud the legislature in North Carolina for the work you've recently done that's going to be signed into law today that addresses the penalties for these type attacks. So thanks to the North Carolina legislature for that. I want to remind the crowd this is an official congressional oversight hearing. It's not a town hall. We're going to operate it like an official hearing and ask you to just listen as participants and let us do our work. So I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today and taking time to testify before the subcommittee. I'm going to introduce you, and then you'll be recognized for 5 minutes. Mr. Mark Eista, Managing Director of Enterprise Security for Duke Energy Corporation. Mr. Will Ray, Director of Emergency Management for the state of North Carolina. Mr. Tim Ponsetti, Vice President of Operations for the SERC Reliability Corporation. And Mr. Jordan Kern, Assistant Professor at North Carolina State University. Go Tigers.
Come on, Chairman. Come on.
So, per committee custom, each witness will have 5 minutes for an opening statement, and followed by a round of questioning from the members. And there's some lights in front of you, I think. Green will designate when we start. When it gets to yellow, you need to start kind of wrapping up. When it gets to red, your 5 minutes is up. We're not going to adhere directly to 5 minutes, but just wrap up there so we can be on time. And so now I recognize Mr. Issa for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
All right, thank you, Chairman Duncan and members of the subcommittee. My name is Mark Asta, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today representing Duke Energy, where I serve as the Managing Director of Enterprise Security. I have more than 27 years' experience as a law enforcement officer, including almost 22 years at the FBI. For the past 4.5 years, I've been applying that experience at Duke Energy. We're one of the largest energy holding companies in the nation, serving 10 million electric and gas customers across 7 states in the Southeast and the Midwest, and our customers depend on us for an essential service. We know how critical it is that we provide our customers and communities with reliable, affordable, and increasingly clean energy, and our comprehensive security strategy is a part of that commitment. In my role, I'm responsible for the safety and security of nearly 28,000 employees, as well as the thousands of assets that we have in the field. My team oversees all aspects of security, including physical access control systems, uniformed security officers, threat intelligence, and more. Duke Energy has always had a robust security strategy to deter attacks and respond quickly as they occur. And that approach is much more than just physical security barriers and defenses. Our multi-layered security strategy includes protective barriers, monitoring and control capabilities, and a cross-functional team assessing threats 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We also partner with industry peers and engage in daily intelligence sharing with law enforcement at all levels. The strategy is always evolving as we evaluate new and emerging threats and expand our partnerships. We're all here today because on the night of December 3rd, 2 Duke Energy substations in Moore County were attacked, cutting power to 45,000 customers. The repairs were extensive, and Duke Energy had crews doing 24-hour shifts, working through multiple repair paths and replacing several large and important pieces of equipment in order to restore service. We appreciate how patient our customers were, and we saw incredible support from the local community during this extended and challenging outage. We continue to work with the FBI and local law enforcement on their investigations into the attacks in Moore County. We've also taken steps to enhance our security strategy in the wake of the attacks. I'd like to share with you some of the measures that we've taken. Immediately after the attacks, we increased monitoring capabilities at our substations in Moore County. And over the last 6 months, we've done a comprehensive review of our electric assets across our 6-state territory. As a result of our review, we're shifting from a tiered ranking system focused largely on an asset's impact to the bulk electric system to a tiered approach with a greater focus on potential impact to customers. It's through this lens we've identified opportunities to increase security and surveillance, and we're developing implementation schedules for this work. We're also improving our processes and rapid response protocols for essential equipment and personnel. We've identified critical parts with long lead times that may be needed for repairs to essential equipment, and we're working to strategically locate those parts to be available for rapid deployment. We've embarked on a plan to train chief law enforcement officers across our 6-state footprint on threats to the grid and how they can better protect it. We will continue exploring opportunities for additional improvements in the future, even as we execute on those upgrades today. But we understand that even with a robust strategy of deterrence and monitoring, no utility can completely eliminate the risk of an attack. That's a reality of operating an electrical system that extends across nearly 100,000 square miles and includes thousands of substations and millions of components. And is why we firmly believe grid resiliency must be a part of the conversation. The same self-healing technology that can detect outages from storms, isolate problems, and reroute power to restore service to customers can also help mitigate the impact of an attack on the grid. Investments in resiliency are a critical part of the $75 billion in grid improvements Duke Energy has planned for its electrical utilities over the next decade. With an electric grid that spans multiple states, Duke Energy does not believe that grid security mandates containing a one-size-fits-all approach would lead to better protection, affordability, or reliability for our customers. We look forward to taking part in the conversation and working with Congress on how best to deter attacks, protect our infrastructure, bolster our supply chain to more quickly replace critical equipment, and recover faster from attacks and other adverse events. With that, I welcome your questions.
Thank the gentleman. I'll now recognize Director Ray for 5 minutes.
Morning, Chairman Duncan, Representative Hudson, and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the state of North Carolina. Broadly, critical infrastructure protection is a vital piece of our overarching Homeland Security enterprise. As we continue to see the types of threats, hazards, and incidents emergency management and public safety agencies nationwide are having to prepare for and respond to increase both in frequency and in complexity. The intersection and integration of the traditional emergency management and the Homeland Security enterprise continues to grow in importance. As the team here in North Carolina has reviewed some of the recent incidents, there are 4 areas that we'd like to highlight as a part of our evaluation today. First is the importance of partnership. In emergency management, we utilize a whole-of-community approach as we execute our all-hazards mission. I cannot overstate the importance of partnerships here in North Carolina to do that effectively. Regardless of incident type or need, it takes public sector, private sector, nonprofits, and volunteer agencies at all levels, federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial, to effectively work through the continuum of mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. This concept is not simply a talking point or a platitude, but a strategy that is central to what we do here. At every level of the response for the December incident, partnerships were key, whether facilitating movement of equipment for power restoration, in feeding or addressing the needs of those impacted, or as we've moved through the investigation. Relationships fostered and developed pre-incident have been and continue to be essential to enhancing and improving what we do in emergency managers. Second, information sharing protections. As I've said, the private sector is an essential part of preparedness and response. The percentage of the Department of Homeland Security defined critical infrastructure sectors owned by the private sector is significant. We must evolve and recognize that public or private, we need the members of those 16 sectors at the table and in partnerships in which they can be fully transparent. Part of the value of the emergency management and Homeland Security enterprises is we come largely without a regulatory role. The information sharing protections currently in place do not adequately support open, honest, and transparent dialogue between public and private sector, and we must be able to work together in an environment that addresses the needs of both public and private sector in that information and intelligence sharing. Current federal and state information sharing and intelligence protections do not fully address the need for open dialogue while protecting the parties engaged, as well as limiting information sharing due to classification requirements. Third would be related to preparedness funding levels and needed flexibility. Many states, including North Carolina, heavily rely on federal funding from the Department of Homeland Security and the Federal Emergency Management Agency to support critical infrastructure protection program execution. Federal funding levels have largely plateaued, accompanied by an increasing requirement to fund various national priorities with that limited funding. While we certainly acknowledge the importance and the validity of those national priorities, those do not always translate to meet the specific needs of the states, locals, tribes, or territories. By forcing states to adopt those strict and specific spending targets, funding is not as effective as it can be. We have incredibly smart and competent emergency management and Homeland Security professionals in states across this nation, and we should trust the abilities of those individuals to make the best choices for their respective state or jurisdiction. Finally, we want to highlight some of the authority challenges. Currently, the Robert Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act is the major governing authority for federal disaster response and recovery. By extension, this act has influenced many of the state disaster declaration authorities in place across this nation. Currently, this federal act is not structured in a way that can support response and recovery for incidents such as the recent Moore County event standing on its own. It is still largely focused on the impacts of a large-scale natural hazard event. If we're going to support the emergency management and Homeland Security apparatus across this country in responding to consequence management needs of communities and individuals in need, we need a modernized Federal Disaster Relief Act. We know that FEMA and other agencies in the federal family have and will continue to support response as they are able and will fully engage under their existing authorities. But the significant gap will be in the lack of ability of federal and state governments to support critical recovery efforts for communities that are experiencing significant impacts. In closing, I'd like to acknowledge the men and women of Moore County. During the incident in December, the response was a demonstration of this whole-of-community approach we talked about at the beginning. Public, private, nonprofit, and volunteer, coordinating to meet the needs of their community. We are incredibly proud of this community and their resilience. On behalf of the state of North Carolina, thank you for holding this hearing, and thank you for highlighting the importance of critical infrastructure protection as an integral part of our Homeland Security strategy and enterprise. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman for his statement. I'll now go to Mr. Ponsetti. Am I pronouncing that right? Yeah, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Duncan, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Tim Ponsetti, VP of Operations at CERC, headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I really appreciate the opportunity to provide CERC's perspective on grid security and resilience. As someone who spent the better part of my career working to keep the lights on in one form or another, I appreciate your focus on these critical issues. CERC is one of 6 regional entities that cover North America, working with and under the oversight of the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, responsible for preserving and enhancing the reliability, resilience, and security of the bulk electric system. CERC is an independent resource for the industry, regulators, and policymakers. Our essential mission is the effective and efficient reduction of risk to the bulk power system using all the tools and powers at our disposal. These tools include not only shining a light on key risks through outreach and training, but ensuring that the mandatory standards are followed and met through a regular cadence of audits and spot checks. And when they're not, we have a variety of enforcement and mitigation tools we can use as well, which include potential for significant fines for major program failures. Every year, CERC staff works with our technical committees, which include 1,500 industry subject matter experts, to identify the top regional risks facing our footprint. 30 are called out in our recent regional reliability report, and the top 10 highlighted. It's worth noting that the CERC team, along with its technical committee members, identified 7 common themes and emerging trends among all the risks, and I want to highlight 2 of those. First, security risks, both cyber and physical, are growing. And in the top 10, we have 4 that are in that area: supply chain, legacy architecture, exploiting cyber vulnerabilities, and extreme physical attacks like we saw in Moore County. Extreme weather is also a key risk to the CERC region, especially when coupled with the lack of situational awareness and lack of field diversity. Along with NERC and the regional policymakers here today, CERC shares a deep concern for the recent increase in physical attacks on electric infrastructure. While we've always seen substation break-ins for copper theft, we're seeing more and more attacks which exceed the threshold of criminal mischief and rise to the level of sabotage. Clearly, Moore County and the Seattle-Tacoma attacks, which resulted in outages last December, along with the plot that the FBI thwarted in Baltimore, have triggered growing concerns around the physical security of our electric infrastructure. Fortunately, the bulk power system has built into it extraordinary levels of redundancy, which enhances reliability and creates resilience. It takes widespread system damage, like from a hurricane, or tornadoes, or ice storms, or a target attack, like what happened in Moore County, to leave a large number of people in the dark for an extended period of time. FERC, NERC, and the regions are focused on the protection of bulk power system, generally defined as 100 kV and above on the transmission system, 75 megawatts and above from generation. Our focus is on the avoidance of large-scale reliability events that generally affect millions of people. That's the framework of SIP 14, which is the physical security standard for protecting the most critical transmission substations. Given the recent increase in physical attacks on the bulk power system, and shortly after the Moore County attack, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission ordered NERC to conduct a study to examine the effectiveness of the SIP 14 standard. This order directed NERC to address 3 questions: the adequacy of the criteria, the adequacy of the risk assessment, and whether a minimum level of physical protection should be established for all BPS transmission substations. At FERC's April 20th, 2023 meeting, Jim Robb, NERC's president and CEO, summarized that SIP 14 study. The study found the criteria and the risk assessments are adequate, but also identified additional actions and areas for further study. And as a next step, NERC and FERC are holding an open technical conference on August 10th in Atlanta to determine if further risk-based measures are needed in this area. In wrapping up my remarks, the impact of localized events, such as the Moore County incidents, are high profile and deeply concerning. As each of my 5 kids reminded me during COVID lockdown, while doing school from home every day online, reliable electric power and reliable internet service are now viewed as part of life's basic necessities. CERC is committed to working with its registered entities, policymakers, NERC, FERC, and others to ensure a highly reliable, resilient, and secure bulk power system in North America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ponsetti. Dr. Ray, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
It's Kern, sorry. Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. My name is Jordan Kern. I'm an assistant professor at North Carolina State University in the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering. At NC State, I conduct research on bulk electric power systems. My group builds software that simulates the behavior of real-world systems, for example, the North Carolina grid, the Duke Energy grid, and/or the entire Eastern interconnection. We use these models to stress test systems performance and explore how the vulnerability of the power grid might change in the future. My group's research is funded by the National Science Foundation and Department of Energy, and many of my most consistent and productive collaborations are with national laboratories, especially Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. My group's research also frequently involves stakeholders in the electric power industry, including electric utilities, merchant power generators, system operators, and regulators. There are some important challenges for grid planners and operators in which I have comparatively little expertise, especially alongside these folks. These include global supply chains, cybersecurity and terrorism, and regulatory permitting and market reforms. I am more qualified to talk about the challenge of protecting the grid against more frequent and extreme weather, while also reducing greenhouse gas emissions to very low levels. More than 80% of major power outages, or outages affecting at least 50,000 people, are caused by extreme weather. This costs $25 to $75 billion per year in the form of damaged equipment and service outages. In order, the most damaging weather events to the grid are typically from severe thunderstorms, then winter weather, hurricanes and tropical storms, extreme heat, and then wildfires. Generation, high-voltage transmission, substations, and low-voltage distribution infrastructure are all vulnerable in different ways. Apart from economic costs, service interruptions pose life-threatening risks for people who depend on electricity-powered medical devices, and these risks can be exacerbated if power outages are associated with or occur at the same time as hazardous conditions like flooding, wildfire, or extreme temperatures. I am often asked how climate change will impact this dynamic, and the answer is it's different across the U.S. and somewhat uncertain, but risks for the grid that scientists are confident about include more intense hurricanes, more frequent and severe heat waves, and depending on the region, drought. Although there are a range of different technology pathways in which the U.S. can achieve adequate cuts in carbon emissions to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, the lowest cost scenarios look likely to involve a lot more reliance on wind and solar. A growing number of tools are available for managing variability in wind and solar, and these include but are not limited to energy storage, flexible and interruptible demand, maintaining responsive generators as backup, increased transmission and coordination across system operators, and improved forecasting. Utility-scale renewable energy has been documented in some cases to perform well during periods of grid scarcity, and distributed solar in particular offers some unique capabilities for resiliency in remote areas. Nonetheless, tying a majority of the U.S. electricity supply to variable energy could alter the exposure of the grid to weather risk in important ways. For example, in my own research, I have observed that due to uncertainty in weather conditions, the amount of backup or firm capacity needed in grids decarbonized via wind and solar could be somewhat higher than what some national modeling studies have suggested. There are other important ways in which a rapid transition to clean energy could alter risks associated with extreme weather. For example, I worry that we don't fully understand the potential for reduced mobility of vulnerable communities during weather disasters if we largely electrify light-duty vehicle transportation in the U.S. One of the best ways to protect against some of these risks is to perform stress tests of our current systems and the systems we hope to build in the future. There are already established practices in place at utilities, system operators, and regulators to do this. However, as the grid expands into other economic sectors, as we add less controllable sources of generation to the mix, and as climate change alters the chance of extreme events occurring, I believe it is becoming more difficult to characterize the plausibility, let alone the likelihood, of different future scenarios and extreme events. And as a result, stress testing the grid is becoming more difficult to perform, and the results somewhat more difficult to interpret, even as the grid is becoming more and more important in the lives of Americans. So I'll leave it there, and thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you, Dr. Kern. I apologize for
No worries.
recognizing you wrongly a minute ago. This concludes opening statements of our panelists, and now we'll move into the question and answer portion of the hearing today. And so I want to start out with Director Ray. I want to thank you for being here, sharing the insights, and as a Director of North Carolina Emergency Management. And, you have many responsibilities, including coordinating the response and recovery to energy disruptions like we saw in December and energy blackouts. Were the lessons learned from the substation attack in December or aspects of the response and recovery that went well that we can take back with us to Washington?
Thank you for that question. And for your earlier introduction, I'll take the field promotion to doctor. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think I really, truly can't overstate the partnership piece. And one thing that I did not expand upon in my
Pull that
statement-
mic just a little bit closer. There's a lot of folks in here, and I want to make sure the TV and everybody can hear.
Certainly.
So.
Better. We have a longstanding practice here in North Carolina of blue sky partnership with all of the partners across the electric sector, to include Duke Energy as well as Dominion and the co-ops and some of our municipal providers. That's something that needs to continue to be incentivized, and that we have the latitude and ability to continue to do that. Here in North Carolina, the way we're structured from an emergency preparedness response and recovery standpoint, as you all know, everything begins and ends locally. This community is there responding to the incident well before we get there, and they will continue to deal with the impact of the incident well after anyone from the state leaves. I think that structure here in North Carolina, our ability to surge resources, whether it's people or equipment, into impacted jurisdictions, and having the authority to continue to do that, I think is going to continue to be key. The other piece of the lesson learned, I think, is some of what I spoke about in my statement. I think what would help continue to facilitate our ability to respond decisively to support our local jurisdictions is appropriate funding levels and flexibility to meet that expanding need as we talk about a very complex issue broadly of critical infrastructure protection. And then secondly, that we have the protections in place to be able to open and transparently talk with private sector partners at large about impacts they're seeing, as well as to be able to transfer and translate information from what is historically law enforcement into our private sector, obviously putting appropriate protections in place for tactics, methods, et cetera, but that we're able to provide actionable information to our local jurisdictions and our private sector partners to take appropriate steps.
Thank you for that. And I think the most valuable thing is just forward thinking, trying to anticipate these type of events before they do happen and how we can do that. But great answer. Ms. Dysta, I don't believe there was a one-size-fits-all approach to harden the grid or electrical substations. We talked about that a little bit this morning. You mentioned in your written testimony that Duke is switching from a tiered ranking system focused largely on an asset's impact to bulk power system to a tiered approach with a greater focus on potential impacts to customers. Can you explain why this new approach is better and what does it mean in practice?
Yeah, Chair Duncan, thank you for that question. Every substation is unique. It's unique in its location, in its design, in its topography, and the customers it served. So this starts with tiering these substations with both their criticality to the bulk electric system, but also to those where there's customer impact. When I say customer impact, we're talking about those substations where we can't reroute power. So if there's a substation and it is taken out of service by a tornado or a hurricane or a threat actor, and we can field switch that power and the customers feel no impact, that is not a substation that we're going to focus on. We are going to focus on those substations like what you saw at West End this morning, where we cannot switch power. We have to use...
You say switch, you're just talking about rerouting,
Rerouting
so there's
power.
no interruption.
Yes, sir.
Correct.
We cannot reroute power. So the customers don't care what route, what circuit their electricity comes on. They just want their lights on. So we start with having an intelligence-driven program. That is understanding what is the threat. Who are the threat actors? Why do they want to hurt the grid? What are their tactics, their techniques, and their procedures? Why? What is their level of maturity? And by understanding that, now we can start implementing controls on those bulk electric system assets and those assets where there is customer vulnerability. And we do that by utilizing a philosophy called defense in depth. You may have heard of defense in depth in the cyber security world. Well, we have the same thing in the physical security world, which is a series of overlapping security controls that allow us to have earlier detection of a threat actor, decrease our response time, and allow a quicker law enforcement response to be able to mitigate the attack. We talked about in West End today that was a very sophisticated attack.
Thank you for that. I'm going to go over time just a little bit, but according to the Energy Information Administration's website, it contains a tremendous amount of information about sensitive information, maps identifying locations of power plants and power lines. I don't want to give the bad guys a roadmap to attack our grid. Are you concerned about the amount of information that might be out there? And quickly, please, Mr. Eista.
Yes, sir. We are concerned. It's not only on that website, but there are also other websites that threat actors have used to identify targets to attack.
Are y'all starting to remove that data from your website? Is Duke Energy addressing that? I'm sure we're going to be talking to the Energy Administration about that as well.
We do not have that level of data on our Duke Energy website.
Good. Thank you. I now recognize my friend from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Is this on? Okay. Thank you all for this. Mr. Ray, thank you for your excellent testimony. I think we have one of the, if not the best emergency management state organization in the country. Thank you for your great work and the folks over there. Unfortunately, it's because we've had a lot of practice with hurricanes and other issues. But as you mentioned, there's a difference between a power outage and a storm response. I don't have time now, but I want to get into the information sharing issue too. I think that's a major issue you've raised that this committee needs to address. But on the issue of authorities in particular, I would say a two-part question. One, what are the security gaps and challenges associated with delivering an emergency response during a blackout as opposed to a storm? But number two, what are the new authorities or different authorities you need to be able to address this type of a threat?
Thank you for that question. And first, I will say I'm privileged to be in my role and work alongside the men and women of North Carolina Emergency Management every day. We are a 300-strong, small but mighty organization, and really value the work that they do every day. I'll take the second part of your question first. I think a couple of things. One, I think our current information sharing and intelligence protections are very narrow and specific, and we need to be able to take a look at those and broaden them to address these types of complex incidents. Again, I think this is a natural evolution of, as we see authorities that have been put in place over the years, we need to take a step back and evaluate how do the incidents we are required to prepare for, respond to, and recover from, how are they also now included in those information sharing protections? I think it needs to be one that is mutually beneficial. We have, as I said, the private sector holds a significant amount of critical infrastructure that we rely on in public safety and in our Homeland Security enterprise every day to do the work that we do. To be able to integrate with them, to be able to support them and have them support us and our communities that are impacted, we need protections that I think benefit both sides of the equation. I think anytime we put emergency responders out or have individuals moving out in an area of operation, whether it's due to a natural event or one like we dealt with in Moore County, there's always a heightened risk. We take our, as well as I know our local partners here in Moore County, we take personnel accountability, and safety is really one of our top operational priorities as we start moving people around. Obviously, when you talk about a response that is not supported by power in a jurisdiction, I think those bring on some specific risks that are different from the short-term risks that we see in a natural hazard. That's something we take into account as we develop response strategies. It's something that the team here in Moore County certainly did as well. And I think it's a testament to really the work that they did in protecting their public safety personnel, that the many individuals and teams and equipment they had out moving across this jurisdiction during the response did so without major incident. That's truly a testament, I think, to their leadership and abilities here.
Thank you for that. As folks who aren't from here may have realized, we're 35 miles away from the largest Army base in the world. I'm proud to be there, Congressman. I've been working to make that installation a leader in energy security and resilience. Within fiscal year 2022 NDAA, I helped secure provision or to require the Secretary of Defense. Well, that was a funny. I did not say we're going to replace Secretary of Defense, but that's a good idea. Maybe we ought to strike that out of the record. But anyway, to require the Secretary of Defense to plan and design for military construction projects that would install an energy microgrid with intentional landing capability for at least 7 consecutive days. And in the upcoming NDAA for 2024, authorizes the Secretary to construct a 10-megawatt microgrid utilizing existing and new generators at Fort Bragg, Fort Liberty. I'm excited to support this legislation through our negotiations and push for this to get over the finish line. I would ask Mr. Eistra and maybe Mr. Ray may want to jump on this too, but how would the construction of microgrids help in situations like this in terms of a quicker, getting customers back online quicker? Do you see that as a solution that we ought to pursue? Mr. Eistra, I'll ask you to start.
Yeah, Congressman, thank you for that question. The grid is very complicated and very interconnected. What I'd like to do is be able to take that question back to my team and then circle back with you.
That'd be great. And I'm out of time, but Mr. Ray, if you have a brief response.
I think anytime we can diversify and as well as integrate solutions that we're putting out into the field, I think that's going to be key, whatever the technology.
And I would just, Mr. Chairman, ask if any of the other witnesses, particularly Mr. Poncetti, this may have been more your area of expertise, but I would love a response in writing to that, your thoughts on microgrid as a solution as we look forward. I appreciate that very much. And Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your indulgence, and I yield back.
Absolutely, we're in your territory, so definitely. I'll now go to Ohio, Mr. Latta, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for my good friend from North Carolina for having us down. Thanks for everyone for being here. We only have 5 minutes to ask questions, so I'm going to have to ask my questions quickly if I can get my responses. First, one of the things that we've always been concerned about is, if information's out there, we want to make sure it's getting disseminated. And information is only as good as if it's getting shared with its partners. Mr. Ray, when I read through your testimony, I was a little bit concerned because also what you said in your testimony, but the words you used, open, honest, and transparent dialogue, is that not occurring?
So I think it is occurring within, the current structure that we have. I think it is something that we are always aware of, and I think in the back of our minds. And so if there's an opportunity to strengthen or harden what those information sharing protections are, that's something we have very clear